Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this session titled Publishing in Africa and Europe, Better Together, which is presented by the Federation of European Publishers and is organized with the support of the International Publishers Association. My name is Jessica Sänger, and I work for the German Publishers and Booksellers Association in Frankfurt. Today, I'm happy to welcome two very distinguished guests from the publishing community who will share their thoughts with us today. From South Africa, we have Brian Wafawarowa joining us. Brian is Chief Content and Product Executive at Juta and Co and current President of the Publishers Association of South Africa, PASA. He founded New Africa Books in 2000 and was its Managing Director until 2009. He is also a former Learning Services Executive at Pearson, South Africa. Brian has extensive experience of association work as a former member of the IPA's Executive Committee and the chair of the IPA's Inclusive Publishing and Literacy Committee, and is also former president of the African Publishers Network, AppNet. Brian is interested in training and development in the book sector and is a trustee on the Nick Perrin Foundation, which provides scholarships for postgraduate studies in publishing, and is a member of the IPA's Africa Innovation Publishing Fund. He studied film and literature at the University of Zimbabwe, holds an MA in literature from Wits University and an executive MBA from the University of Cape Town. Welcome, Brian. And for the European perspective, I'm honored to present Sandro Ferri. Sandro was born in New York in 1952. He studied philosophy and economics at the universities of Rome and Paris. In 1979, he founded, together with his wife Sandra Ozzola, the publishing house Edizioni EO in Rome. In 2005, he founded Europa Editions in New York, and a few years later, Europa Editions UK in London, a publishing house which is now directed by his daughter Eva Ferri. Thank you both very much for joining us. This panel is organized by the Federation of European Publishers, FEP, which is an independent umbrella organization representing book publishers across Europe. FEP has 29 national member associations and acts as the voice of publishing in Europe. So I'll stop talking now and open up the discussion with our two distinguished guests. And I'd like to start with Brian. So Brian, from your perspective, quite generally speaking, what is it to be a publisher in South Africa today?
Jessica, thank you for that generous introduction, and good afternoon to the guests, and thank you for joining us this afternoon. I think publishing in South Africa at the moment is a mixed blessing. There are things that are certainly going well. There are efforts that are bearing fruition, but there are also quite a number of challenges that we are facing and are still grappling with. We have a very secure and stable K-12 education publishing, which is supported by a very healthy and well-organized state spending. And there is also efforts by various government departments, including arts and culture and sports, trade and industry, to come up with a creative industries master plan, which is looking at the growth of this particular sector. As players in the industry, we are involved in that and trying to get it going. And we really think that it is something that is going to take our industry to another level. We also have sector education training authorities, like the publishing sector belongs to the processing and manufacturing sector. It's a very funny one, but that's where we belong. And it collects about 1% of the pay levy and puts it into a training pool. So there is a healthy inflow of apprentices coming into our industry through that program. However, I indicated at the beginning that it is a mixed bag, and sometimes it indicates quite a lot of dissonance in the sense that on one side, if you look at the professional and academic publishing, where there isn't a similar funding arrangement, there is really rampant copying that is going on, with about 70% of the market being fulfilled by piracy and illegal copying by students, with very high levels of ignorance. If you look at the exchanges that the students have about what they can do to get these materials freely. And to compound that situation, we're also confronted by the Copyright Amendment Bill, which many of you are familiar with, which seeks, among other things, to introduce fair use instead of fair dealing. But within it, it's quite open-ended and will impose an onerous requirement on publishers to actually differentiate between what is fair dealing, what is fair use, and what is rampant abuse of intellectual property and copyright. We are working with IFRO and the IPA to try and resolve that. So what we really see here is a government that is on one side really trying to prop up this industry and grow it, but on the other side doing something that is really contradictory to that and undermining the industry. So I'm one that always tries to find a solution when I have an opportunity like this. And I think in addition to the work that the International Publishers Association and IFRO are doing with us in terms of trying to influence the process and lobbying government to have another think around this, we should also be looking at best practice elsewhere, where there are areas where there have been attempts to create a good balance between increasing access, which is the noble thing that they are trying to do, and also protecting rights holders and ensuring that we have a viable and sustainable industry going forward. So if there are such ideas that we can collect through IFRO or the IPA and present in a general way to our government as we deliberate further on that copyright amendment bill, that would be certainly be welcome. That's one area of collaboration that I see. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Brian. But much of that sounds incredibly familiar from my perspective. Governments, well, giving with one hand, taking with another, if you like. Sandro, would you like to add the perspective from Italy?
Yes, hello. Thank you, everybody, for being here. The Edizioni O, it was founded 40 years ago, established in 1979. It's one of the main independent publishers in Italy. Independent publishing in Italy is important, even if it is compared with other countries. It's almost 50% of the share of the market is with independent publishers. But of course, there is also a big concentration. There are 4 big groups, and there is a phenomenon which is not only in Italy, but in Italy especially, it's very present. It's the horizontal and the vertical concentration, I would say, which it means that groups control publishers and distribution and bookstores. In this situation, which is very interesting, and in the last 2 years it resisted the pandemic, which is a good thing. I mean, the Italian market showed, and the Italian industry, publishing industry, showed a solidity, and it resisted, and at the same time there were important transformations in the market. There is a small growth of the audiobooks. Still, it's a small percent. There is an increase, important increase of the e-commerce as for the sales of books, but still the stores, the physical stores, and especially independent stores, have demonstrated a resilience, a resistance, and this is very comforting. As for our publishing house, we have started 40 years ago specializing in Eastern Europe literature translation, and then going forward in the time, we have concentrated in a few linguistic and cultural area. One of which is Africa. We have published more than 60 books, novels of different African literatures, and we have only this year, to speak about this year, we have more than eight books to be translated from different languages from Africa. So this is an important part of our work. With our contacts, unfortunately, concerning African literature are not so much with the African publishers directly, which is it's a pity, and it's not easy. I mean, in the big international fairs, there are few African publishers who participate. So often we have to deal through American or British or French agents or publishers. But in several we had a few opportunities during the years to go to some African fairs, book fairs, especially in North Africa. For instance, a few years ago, there was an interesting one in Casablanca, where we had the opportunity to meet several African publishers.
Thank you, Sandro. That sounds fascinating. I'm wondering, Sandro touched on the pandemic and the effects of that. I'm wondering, this is a question to you both, how has the legal and regulatory framework in your respective countries supported you, or perhaps not, during this period? Brian, can you tell us anything about how that's been handled in South Africa?
I think in South Africa, there wasn't, like anywhere else, I think South Africa was probably one of the strongest lockdowns that were experienced at a global level. Even now, as the world begins to relax, South Africa still hasn't lifted the state of emergency. And I think it's for a good cause. I think they made a good call, otherwise things would have been very bad. There wasn't any particular program that was earmarked at publishing, but there was a huge solidarity fund that was created by business and government. And the role of that solidarity fund was to alleviate the suffering that individuals and companies were experiencing. And I suspect that there are individual publishing companies that applied for relief on that fund, which was a good thing. I think at some stage when I think we were on lockdown level 4, and our lockdowns were ranging from 1 to 5, 5 being the most severe. When we were at level 4, and it was becoming apparently clear that the industry, even within IPA initiatives, that the industry and the books played a role in terms of maintaining sanity among people that were staying at home, we were able to apply and be treated at some of the exempt goods that could still be distributed and people could still have access to around that time. And I think the fact that they agreed to do so was quite good. We also took, together with other members of the publishing community globally, and taking a cue from the IPA, decided to pull together and indicated how we could support learners who were sitting at home. So many publishers actually made PDFs and electronic files of their materials, especially in situations where the print copies had been purchased. They made those available to learners in order to make sure that they could continue working. There was an initiative with the Department of Education to make sure that learners could still get materials at home, and the Department of Higher Education and the Association of Universities also to make sure that learners had access. The impact was alleviated that way. I think it wasn't as severe as we feared in the end. And I think those initiatives in which government was also involved helped significantly.
Thank you, Brian, for making that important point about also the value of those publications. You said keeping people sane, but also keeping children in education. Incredibly important role. Sandro, I think Italy has been quite exemplary, certainly within Europe, in terms of supporting the sector through the pandemic. Can you tell us how that was achieved?
Yes, it has been, I think, exemplary. If we can, for one time, at least once, we have been exemplary. There were no direct measures to support publishing and bookstores, but there were two important decisions by government. One is first there was a general symbolic in a way, but not only symbolic. It had concrete effects. The fact that bookstores were declared by government as essential, selling an essential good, no? So which allowed to stay open even during the worst blackdowns. And then there were two important measures. One is called 18 app, and it's a bonus of 500 euros given by government to 18-year-old people, and it was very much used to buy books, and which brought in the market a new generation of readers. That was important in a difficult period. The second important measures is there has been a funding for libraries, and libraries were encouraged to buy to the bookstores of their neighborhood, which is also important to support bookstores. And this was financed twice, and it has been a serious help for bookstores. Last thing to say, I mean, I said before that the industry showed a good resistance. Now, I think, as in other parts of the world, we are facing problems with paper shortage, paper price, and with energy, of course, and transports. But I think this is the international problem.
Thank you, Sandro. I'm sure you're right. That's something that we're hearing about here a lot. Interesting parallel there, that in both your countries, bookshops were considered essential resale. We only had that in a few parts of Germany, and but that was a very valuable part of the response to the pandemic for us. But I wonder, sort of going forward, what do you think are areas where the framework for publishing could be improved in your respective countries? And are there areas where, for instance, the EU and the African Union could collaborate in order to achieve that? Brian, perhaps you'd like to go first on this one?
Jessica, apologies here for drawing on personal experience, but I think I was very lucky at the beginning of my career to be exposed to the international publishing community, first through the Frankfurt Book Fair Fellowships. I was one of the young people selected in 2000 to be on that program. You have indicated my exposure to the continent through the African Publishers Network and also through the IPA and WIPO. And the reason why I'm citing all these things is that they broadened my horizon and exposure to the possibilities at a global level. And what it did, for example, was to be able to create networks across the continent, where, for example, with publishers in Ghana and in Kenya, we published the stories across Africa in the New African Stories. And then also worked with publishers in London with translations and co-publishing, including in Ian Randall, Red Sea Press in North America, Ian Randall Publishers in the Caribbean, and some publishers in India. And what it did was mainly in the trade sector to broaden our scope significantly, because we were no longer limited to the small Southern Africa or South African market, but we had exposure to that global market. So where I think we can really collaborate and work together is that although some of the activities that I mentioned are still carrying on, for example, there are a number of FEP programs that are carrying on now, like the South African government still sponsors a few publishers here and there to go to London, to go to the Frankfurt Book Fair outside the pandemic, and also to attend some African book fairs. There is also the Bologna Book Fair and its programs, particularly on children's books, which the African continent is strong in. Of course, the Frankfurt Book Fair continues with LitChem and also with the Common Exhibition Stand for African Publishers, where they are able to meet publishers from Europe and the rest of the world and trade in rights and get their books exposed. The Turkish Book Fair, for example, is still running programs, fellowship programs on the continent. So Sharjah Book Fair is doing the same with African publishers. I can mention the Goethe Institute and its work in culture, but also the Norwegian Publishers Translation Program, where they were exchanging translations between Norwegian languages and African languages with African publishers. WIPO's publishing cycle, for example, which includes membership. So these things are going on, but some of them have not grown and others have gone under. And I think if we could work on those and create collaboration spaces where young publishers would be exposed. I'll give another example of what the Nick Perrin Foundation is doing, for example. Every year we take students to the London Book Fair who are in their final year and about to go into work the following year. And the exposure that they get by being on a global book platform like the London Book Fair is huge. And the horizon and perspective of such young people beginning to get into the industry is already significantly broadened, and they are no longer confined to the constraints of what is happening in their limited markets. So I really think if we can aid the WIPO's Publishing Circle program, that would be a very good thing. If other book fairs can join book fairs like London, Frankfurt Book Fair, in order to create these programs, and that if translation programs like the ones done by the Norwegians would still continue, then there would be more people that are exposed to companies like Sandro's, beyond the one-to-one company liaison, to something that happens at a more global platform, which is open to all those that are attending. I think that would be something that would really work if we could continue that way.
Thank you, Ryan. I think a lot of what you said also speaks to the importance of the kind of collaboration we can have within book fairs, and particularly when we meet in person, but not only. So thank you for reminding us of that, and we hope to come back to that world soon. Sandro, would you like to add some ideas on collaboration?
Yeah, I really appreciated what Brian said, and about the opportunities to increase the cooperation between Africa and Europe. and I think we should think about real concrete steps to increase this cooperation. For example, I think it would be good for European publishers to have the opportunity to visit some of the African book fairs, and of course the African publisher who could come to Frankfurt and to London and Torino too in Italy, which is an important book fair, and Bologna, of course, for children, but also for adult trade. So Torino would be very good for this. And I think this is a good moment for this. I mean, it's a good, there is more attention in the general public. I think in Europe there is more attention toward African publishing and African literature. So we must take profit of this and try to increase the opportunities to meet.
Thank you, Sandro. You've been mentioning translations in particular, because I think that's something that you also engaged in very actively as a publisher yourself. How do you view the role of these translations, and can they be promoted? How can they be promoted between the continents, perhaps?
I go, or Brian goes? I go, yeah. I think translations are essential, of course, are essential. I'm speaking mostly of most of the African books who are translated are from English, from French, from Portuguese, but there are other languages, of course, and that would be good to know more also about this. And generally speaking about translation, and particularly about translations from African literatures, they are very important, and the role of translator is growing, and it's very good. And of course also the awards, for instance, the awards are very important. For instance, in 2021 we acquired the rights, in Italy, the rights of 2 African books who won 2 important awards. I'm talking about the Goncourt in France by Mohamed Mbougar Sarr from Senegal, and in the UK, the Booker Prize, who was won by a South African author, Damon Galgut. So these awards are very important because they bring the authors to a wider audience, and it's very important in this sense that translators and publishers are ready to take profit of these things, and to increase the distribution, the diffusion of African literature.
Thank you. Brian, is there anything you'd like to add on translations?
Yeah, thank you. What I wanted to add there is the role that translation can play in the economics of publishing. One of them is really to take the African stories that are developed here and give them a global audience. Some of them will be originated in African languages and then are taken to right across the world in other languages. But there are some also that are originated here in English that can even travel yonder than that. But I wanted to talk about something less familiar but quite important. I think people sometimes do not realize the amount of African heritage that sits in Europe, for example, mainly because of the advanced publishing practice there. So the biggest stories, range of stories to be published in Africa, across Africa, the African stories, for example, New African stories, were actually licensed for translation from a company in France called EABF, and they were in French, but they were collected right across Africa. So the largest corpus of folklore on Africa was actually sitting in France and legitimately published there. But through translation licensing agreements, we were able to bring those stories into about 65 African languages across the continent through translations. That's a massive consumption of those stories, which would not have been accessible, ironically, to African-speaking people because they were in French and published there. So it's just that perspective that I wanted to mention, and I don't think it is confined to children's stories. I think it applies to other areas as well.
Thank you, Brian. That's a fascinating experience. Another area I'm wondering about that I think is important across publishing today is there are various technological challenges that we face, and I wonder whether you see opportunities for tackling those in, intercontinental collaboration as well. Sandro, is that something you've been looking at all?
Sorry, Jessica, can you repeat the first part of the question? I didn't get it.
Yes, of course. Technological challenges. I think we face a range of technological challenges as a sector, and I just wonder whether you see opportunities for collaboration to work on those as well.
Yes, I do. Of course, I do. I think in a way this is maybe it's the easiest part because technology is the center of interest of everybody. So and it's usually it's a general languages who is understood in every country. So I don't think there are difficult challenges talking about technology cooperation. I think we should do it, and yes, of course.
Thank you. Brian, anything to add on tech from your side?
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. I think it's an important area, a very important area, in the sense that one of the challenges that we face is access, and the other challenge that we face is the improvement of learning outcomes. So if you look, for example, at university level, the throughput of South African universities is about 14%. That is the percentage of students that complete their studies in time. And then in the school sector, we have issues, including to these learning materials. So my fascination with technology is whether we can use it to actually overcome some of those challenges that we couldn't overcome in print. For example, is there a way of achieving universal access to textbooks and learning materials by using technology and licensing models as opposed to copies that go about? One of the challenges that we have on the continent really is the technology itself. I think other issues like bandwidth and teacher and educator and learner attitudes towards technology can be overcome through training and investment in that infrastructure. But when it comes to platforms like Pearson's global education platform, if such platforms could be licensed to African countries through the type of collaboration that we have, we could actually not have any need for the types of changes that we see coming through legislation, because the target of those policies will have been addressed through technology. And if, for example, we can come up with learning systems that we see elsewhere that have diagnostics and remedial interventions to make sure that learners are within track of the learning curve and what is desired at every stage, and that we can create learning systems that can assure that there is better throughput, there is better learning outcomes, I think we will be going beyond publishing to being very, very impactful at a human development level. So I really think that that type of collaboration is essential, because we have seen those technologies. We know they are available, and what we need to do is to collaborate on their, I think, fair licensing to companies that are on the continent, and that could achieve a lot here.
That's very interesting, Brian. Thank you very much. And again, that valuable point on the importance of good quality educational publications for good outcomes in education. I think that's very important. And I wonder, moving away a little bit from the regulatory framework and into publishing as a community, to both of you, do you think there are areas and ways in which the sharing of best practices between publishers on both continents and across both continents could be promoted by organizations like the IPA or the FEP? Sandro, any ideas on that at all?
Personally, I believe in physical bookselling. For me, it's very important, even in an era dominated by technology as it is now. But we see that readers, they very much ask for the physical experience of bookselling. So I think that would be a good thing, or even to realize cooperation opportunities in this field. I mean, for instance, booksellers who could exchange their experiences, even if the two, of course, we are talking about markets who are very different and also very diverse. But I think that the general discussion and an exchange of experiences in this field would be very welcomed, I think.
Thank you, Sandro. Anything to add from your side, Brian?
I think there isn't much that is new that we can do in that space, but I would like to cite current practices and how we can expand on those. One of them is, if you look at WIPO's publishing circles, where the objective is to be able to place young publishers into mentorship programs in companies that are known for best practice. And that when those young people go back to their companies, wherever it may be on the continent or in the world, developing world, they will be able to impart part of that best practice to their colleagues. I also think that given the rich cultural heritage that Africa has, there's also an opportunity for young European publishers to also be placed in some forms of internships within African companies through some exchange programs in order to get those ideas going through. I know that the IPA was also thinking about those programs of mentorships. And some of them is really about identifying top publishers in both areas and saying, can you take on the following young people who work in the area in which you work, and try and mentor them. And that on its own will have a huge impact, I think.
Okay, thank you very much for those suggestions. We have only a few more minutes left, amazingly, and I would like to open it up now for questions from the audience. And I'm already seeing the first question coming up here in the chat that I would like to pass on to you. I'll read it out. It's a question from Anne Bergman from FEP. Hello, everyone, and thanks for the excellent webinar. I was wondering whether Brian and Sandro had any ideas on top of the various initiatives they have mentioned, and Anne hopes that she can have a list of those, whether Europe can help African publishers and vice versa, and consequently authors, to be more present on the European scene, including at book fairs, which are very important to bring more attention to those titles and their authors. Thank you. And she adds, should this be at member state level, or should it be done at European Union level? Would either of you like to respond to that question on how to enhance the presence of authors across continents?
Yeah, I think Sandro mentioned something quite interesting earlier on, where he pointed out the idea of even European publishers being present at African book fairs or book events. They don't have to be book fairs. There are some prominent ones that we have now, like South Africa, Ghana, Nairobi, and also Cairo. The idea behind that is when somebody arrives at such a book fair, there are many, many publishers that have access to those few people. Whereas if you were to transfer those to a European book fair, it could cost a bit to get as many of them as possible. But at the same time, I also think that it is necessary to continue the programs. Sandro indicated that the access that he has to African publishers is through agents. And I think whilst that remains a commercial arrangement, I don't think that it will have the type of cultural impact that you need to have on the individuals that are involved in that as you would actually achieve at a book fair. So I would like to suggest that that's probably a good way of getting that going. As to whether it will be happening at a European level or African Union level, I'm not sure. I think those big entities can play the coordinating role, but I think where the publishers and the participants themselves who are hungry are involved in it, that's when you really have impact, real impact. I think it must be cascaded in terms of levels of participation, including the large organizers, but also the individual publishers involved. Yeah.
Thank you, Brian. Sandro, would you like to contribute to that?
Yeah, I agree with what Brian said. I think, of course, the cooperation and the contacts between publishers and between people who work into the publishing world are very important. But I also think we should create more opportunities of meetings with authors, with different kind of authors. So I don't know, try to encourage the travels of African writers, authors to Europe in different situations. I mean, there are plenty of festivals and other besides the fairs, there are many other opportunities, but also of European authors to Africa to meet their colleagues. I think this would be very important to strengthen the links, which, as I said before, I think this is a moment, a new moment of interest, of overture between the two continents, at least speaking about literature, which is the field where I am more involved. And I think we must take profits of this and encourage even more of these contacts.
Thank you both. I hope somebody's been taking notes here and making sure that we retain all these recommendations that you're giving us. I think they're tremendously valuable. At the moment, I'm not seeing any more questions in the chat. It's the last chance to send us your question if you would like to do that. Otherwise, as I say, I'm amazed that we're almost running out of time again. But this does give me the opportunity to mention that there is going to be another panel on publishing organized within the Africa-Europe Week. on the 17th, and that's at 2 o'clock Central European Time, under the title Local Educational Content, a Building Block. And it will feature Maxwell Wahomey from Longhorn Publishers in Kenya and Brian Gilsenan of C.F. Fallon in Ireland. So no new questions in the chat. In that case, we have ended perfectly on time. And I'd like to thank you both for your very, very interesting contributions and sharing your wisdom and knowledge with us. And thank everybody for listening. And please, everybody, stay safe, take good care of yourselves, and we hope to see many of you at the next opportunity at a physical book fair. Thank you.
And thanks
you
for leading us through this, Jessica, and thanks to the audience too.